Hi, it's Dwyer. It is Monday, July 11th, 2022. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, I was getting prepared for the Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence fight. Right? The biggest fight at welterweight in quite some time. And I decided to go back to find a video on an equally big fight involving two guys who I thought were at least commensurate. And I came across the tape, and it's a must-watch. The highlights are in my favorites folder right now, of Oscar De La Hoya's victory. We'll put victory in quotes, over Pernell Whitaker. Right now, let me just say this diplomatically. Right? Pernell and Oscar both would give both Spence and Crawford all they could handle. Right? Let's also talk about the actual fight. Going into the 12th round, Larry Merchant and Roy Jones both had Pernell Whitaker with a one-round lead. Right? This fight is that rare fight that is completely tainted by judges' scorecards that were too lopsided. I believe both camps could have taken a loss if the scoring was just more reasonable. Right? Had Oscar won the fight by a round or two, okay. We'd say, well, the fight was in L.A., right? Oscar was the younger guy. He was the fighter of the moment. But these scorecards were absolutely ridiculous, and it discredited the fight. What I want people to realize is this is one of the great strategic chess matches I know of in boxing history. You see the greatness of both men. It's clear. The talent level is clear. There are jaw-dropping moments in the fight. Understand that Oscar De La Hoya fought inverted. His big hand was his left. It's his lead hand. But yet Oscar fought out of an orthodox stance. Right, so here is Oscar fighting out of an orthodox stance against a southpaw, Pernell Whitaker. And Whitaker decides, and it's a jaw-dropper. If you're in a boxing, this is stunning from the first two rounds of the fight. Pernell's big idea is to smother Oscar's left hand. So Pernell is over by Oscar's left side. He's not giving Oscar enough room to throw the left hand. Right? Pernell also stands in such a way where if Oscar tries to throw what we called at the time a 45, because Oscar would throw his left hand at a 45-degree angle, Pernell has his back to it. So Oscar would have to find a way to not have the punch be a rabbit punch or a punch in Pernell's back. Pernell sets up this angle from the very early rounds. Now let me just say, to Spence and Crawford, the fans will be lucky if either of those two fighters try to pull off anything as audacious as Pernell Whitaker does with this defensive construct. So, it's so interesting, it takes away Oscar's offense. Because understand, Pernell has great legs. Now, the interesting thing to keep in mind in this fight, in terms of talent level, is this Oscar who's bent forward, who is coming forward is the same Oscar who shows you his great legs against Tito Trinidad in a fight that the judges awarded to Trinidad later in his career. Oscar had great legs, but not in this fight, right? The person who's governing the movement and spacing is Pernell Whitaker. So Pernell is so far over to Oscar's left hand that Oscar, after rounds where he can't really do anything, he's throwing punches, but the punches aren't hurting Pernell. Let me say, shame on the judges if the judges were awarding Oscar for ineffective volume. Because let's remember, boxing has two sides. There's offense and then there's defense. Pernell Whitaker here is putting on a defensive masterpiece against not just a hard puncher, but an extremely fast-handed one. Let's also make another point here too. The era. I know Oscar got out a little bit late at night. I understand that Oscar ran the streets. I need for people to understand that the culture was different back then. Folks, Ray Leonard ran the streets. Carlos Monzon ran the streets. I was a Yankee fan growing up. I can tell you, I would read page 6 of the New York Post, and there'd be Yankees out in clubs after games. Right? The current ethos of the 24-hour athlete, the LeBron James, who is spending $1 million on his body, that's relatively new. I can tell you in the 70s especially, this fight was in the 90s, but I can tell you in the 70s, baseball fans know this, you'd be watching spring training, and you would have athletes out there with bare bellies, right? First off, they had to have off-season jobs. I'm not making this up, because Major League Baseball didn't pay enough for an athlete to live comfortably. I'm not talking about the superstars, I'm talking about the average athlete. So I'd be watching Yankee games, and the Yankees weren't that bad in the Bobby Mercer era. I'd be watching Yankee spring training games, and Bill White, Phil Rizzuto, the announcers would be openly laughing, Frank Messer, about the fact that a certain guy relaxed a bit too much in the offseason. And he was there trying to get down to his playing weight. This is in spring training. Now, in boxing, people need to understand, the money just wasn't that big. It was for Ali and heavyweights. It was for Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran. But understand, the culture was that you were fighting so that you could hang out with the self-employed models. So you could be running the streets a little bit, right? Think about the 86 Mets. Dwight Gooden misses the World Series parade because he's out partying, right? I mean, just understand the ethos back then. So, you can fault De La Hoya, and I'll agree with this, for not maximizing his talent. He's a Mickey Mantle type character, right? De La Hoya ran the streets a little bit, was out late at night, may have, had strong drinks or strong smoke, whatever the situation was, may have lived a bit too much. I'll agree, his career should have gone on past its expiration point, and he probably wasn't the elite fighter very late in his career that he was in his 20s. But let me just say, please don't sleep on De La Hoya in his 20s. right? Much faster hand speed. Let me repeat that. Much faster hand speed. You see it in this fight than Errol Spence, right? Much faster. And this guy was a puncher, right? Has a back foot, so much back foot that he's faulted for it in the Trinidad fight, right? A fight that he's clearly winning before the last few rounds where he decides he's just going to dance. Excellent, excellent. Left hook, excellent. Uppercut. You see the uppercut in this Pernell Whitaker fight. So here is prime De La Hoya. Whitaker is the fighter who's a little bit past his expiration date. But this is prime De La Hoya. Also, don't sleep on Pernell Whitaker. The defense is dazzling. At times, so too was the offense. Look at the Roger Mayweather fight. That's on YouTube. So here you have some intriguing moments. Let's get controversial. So Oscar De La Hoya, out of his orthodox stance with Pernell Whitaker seemingly parked on De La Hoya's left side, his dominant side. And it's dangerous when you're trying to smother a puncher's big hand, right? De La Hoya decides to go southpaw. So De La Hoya goes southpaw. So then Pernell Whitaker, right? And I haven't seen the better defensive fighter, right? Pernell Whitaker, after getting touched with some shots, gets hit with the left hook, and you notice that De La Hoya has deadly artillery. Whitaker decides to make the adjustment. So then Whitaker turns around a little bit, and the two guys start wrestling. Right? At one point, both guys fall to the floor. Now, here's where it gets a little bit controversial. Whitaker was a master at hitting you when you were unprepared. Oscar hits the canvas. They call it a slip. I would argue that that might not have been a slip, that Oscar may have been dropped. Later in the fight, the same thing happens. But it doesn't happen over by the side of the ropes. It happens more toward the center of the ring. This time, Mills Lane. And you're blessed here, not just with great fighters, but a great referee. Right? Mills Lane was one of the premier refs of the era. Mills Lane calls it a knockdown. The only knockdown in the fight is Pernell Whitaker dropping Oscar De La Hoya. Right? So De La Hoya gets off the canvas. Now keep in mind, De La Hoya is still dangerous. Keep in mind, the guys on HBO have this fight razor close, at least Merchant and Jones. Right? Oscar's in the lead because Oscar was the more active guy. Pernell should have thrown more punches, but if you're into defense, he's the one fighting the tactically brilliant fight. He's the one who has neutralized the slugger's left hand. He's the one who has forced the slugger to actually fight out of a southpaw stance. He's the one who's actually dropped the slugger. At least once, possibly twice. Right? So then, Pernell is clowning. Now, I love people who start clowning. I watched the '88 Olympics with Roy Jones, and I was cheering when Roy Jones was clowning. Folks, they did not give Roy Jones the gold medal. Here, Pernell is so comfortable in front of a guy with a very high KO percentage. Very high. that Pernell at times is acting like he's hurt, he's staggering across the ring. Pernell's so good defensively, and you hope you see this in Crawford Spence. That Pernell, as he's clowning, drops his hands. His hands aren't up here, folks. He drops his hands. Right now, let me just say again, the era's different. Today, people would be offended. Right? We're PC'd up to the hilt. Here, the fighters have the ultimate respect for each other. You notice that even in a fight where they wrestle and throw each other to the ground, they keep touching gloves. Right? The guys have a lot of respect. So we get to the 11th round. This is the revealing round, folks. Pernell Whitaker decides, okay, let me show some offense. Yes, he waits until the 11th round to step on the gas. And he starts cuffing De La Hoya around the ring. We get to the 12th round. At the start of the 12th round, Roy Jones says, yeah, things are going Pernell's way, basically, right? Pernell seems to have the upper hand here. Larry Merchant says, I have him up by a round. That's going into the 12th round. Then you have something that's hard to describe. You have Pernell Whitaker moving, bringing the crowd in, basically showing the world, this guy can't hurt me. The way the fight ends is Pernell is down in a catcher stance, catcher from baseball. And he's looking up at De La Hoya, and De La Hoya can't do anything about it. Now, apparently, that was too much bravado for the judges, right? I personally consider the scorecards to be a travesty. I could have lived with them saying, oh, De La Hoya has eked it out, because De La Hoya is flashing hand speed. De La Hoya is the one seeking Pernell Whitaker. But if you're into defense, if you're into strategy, if you can give a guy a round who hardly throws any punches, but who makes the other guy look as bad as he's ever looked, who forces the other guy to get out of his normal stance, to actually change his stance, and is still frustrating the other guy, then I don't know how Pernell Whitaker did not win this fight. Again, the video is in my favorites folder. These are two Hall of Famers. You knew that entering the fight, even though De La Hoya was in his 20s. Right? These guys were immensely talented. Right? Pernell, just moving backwards with his hands down, is able to totally defend De La Hoya just based on where he is in the ring. Now, De La Hoya has been charitable in his comments on the fight. Right? De La Hoya, over time, basically talked about how the best defensive fighter he faced was Pernell Whitaker. Right? De La Hoya had a lot of respect for Whitaker. I understand the side of the argument that Whitaker didn't throw enough punches. But the Whitaker who comes out in the 11th round shows you that after the first 10 rounds, that he spends embarrassing De La Hoya. He shows you that, gee, I can hit this guy on demand. And of course, Whitaker scores the only official knockdown of the fight. I would invite people to look at the first time De La Hoya hits the canvas. Was that a knockdown? Now, with this scoring, where some of the judges had De La Hoya winning by 4 or more rounds, it probably would not have mattered. Right? But we're talking about a higher standard here than the 3 judges on fight night. This is boxing history, folks. These are 2 of the best to ever lace them up at welterweight. This version of Oscar De La Hoya is better than the version who loses to Floyd Mayweather or Manny Pacquiao, even later in his career. Right? This is prime De La Hoya. This is a strategic fest. Right? De La Hoya, even as he's frustrated, is throwing combinations where you look at the combination, you're thinking, man, this dude has hand speed. Right? De La Hoya catches Pernell at one point with a left hook. And Pernell, who was a tough crowd, right? Pernell viewed himself as a standard bearer. At welterweight, Pernell actually looks at him and smiles. That's how high level the fight is. Right? Pernell doesn't smile to mock the shot. No, Pernell smiles and looks at Oscar, and I believe the smile is actually for Oscar, not even for the crowd, to say, all right, you caught me with that one. Right? It was a great fight. It was the best sloppy fight, frustrating fight you're ever going to see. Right? It's Oscar De La Hoya against Pernell Whitaker. Let's just say I consider both of these guys to be better than Errol Spence. Whether they're better than Crawford to me seems to be a different level. I'll leave up to you. But let's just say, as we talk about the great welterweight fights in history, let's try to remember this one. Let's hope the talent level in the Crawford-Spence fight is on par. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section of this video. I'll do a separate Spence-Crawford video. I am picking Crawford in that fight. I would not be surprised if Crawford wins that fight by stoppage. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section so others can see them. Thanks for stopping by.